Hey, thanks for listening to Everyday Greatness. It's a nice little show brought to you by our major sponsor, ARA Group, an employee-owned company that provides essential services for your facility and infrastructure and is one of Australia's biggest supporters of community projects. Everyday Greatness isn't rocket science. We're just trying to make you feel proud again of simply being a good, solid human being by speaking to some real people who found that the strength they needed to deal with any challenge in their life had been inside them the whole time. The ARA Group is proud to stand alongside Everyday Greatness, and we all hope that you enjoy the show.
My guest today on Everyday Greatness, retired business executive Mary Canning, is like a bowl of indulgent chocolate ice cream that's as healthy as a stick of broccoli. A lot of people seem to think that you can't have delicious, gluttonous, chocolatey, tasty food that's also good for you and healthy. The same is said in business. You can't possibly just be a good, solid human being and successful. But Mary Canning pretty spectacularly bucks that trend. Mary grew up in New Brunswick in Canada, a potato farming community full of authentic people who called a spade a spade. They never tried to be somebody they weren't. And Mary brought those traits of authenticity to her corporate life. When she told a company managing director in her early business life that she wanted to tell her team about a car crash her mother had been in, he told her, "People don't need to see that side of you." Mary disagreed. Mary Canning takes great pride in figuratively stripping bare and allowing teams to see her human side. Mary Canning is the perfect example of an authentic leader. Far from being a pushover though, being authentic helped Mary start a successful company in Canada before moving to Australia, where she became a business director at BD and Medtronic, multinational medical companies. Mary's had a seat at the table in plenty of boardroom conversations, but she's made sure she's spoken candidly and had her voice heard. Beyond being authentic just to enhance her corporate reputation though, Mary is just a flat-out nice person. While she was a corporate powerhouse, she used to go for morning walks with a staff member just to stay fit and have a chat. Mary mentors young men and women who often ask her the question whether they can be a nice person and get ahead in business. And Mary answers that question with her actions. One of the proudest things she can say about herself is that her son, Jamie, comes to her for advice on how to run his own business as a gym owner. It gives me all the pleasure in the world to welcome one of the most authentic people on the face of the earth to Everyday Greatness. Mary Canning, welcome.
Thank you so much, Barnaby. Absolute pleasure to be here.
So growing up in a potato farming community in Canada, you must have seen some very authentic people who just called a spade a spade. Who were some of the more memorable characters around town?
Well, you're right, Barnaby. Growing up in a small country town, and in a time where there were small family businesses, you knew a lot of people in the town or knew of a lot of people. You were surrounded by authenticity. Life in a small town was really based on this. Probably the person I need to call out that was the most authentic in my life was my father. He worked for the Department of Transportation and often had to call a spade a spade. I recollect a time I was home from university visiting, and it was in the spring, and it was a time, and here in Australia, we're very familiar with flooding. It was a time when there was massive floods in our hometown and outside of our hometown. We had a really heavy snowfall winter and a quick spring, a warm spring, which caused massive flooding just because of the snow melting, and as well on the river, St. John River, that went past our town and the neighboring town. had lots of ice, and with the ice floods, it was like a bulldozer, so it would knock things down in their path. And I recall, Dad was out and he was, with road closures and really busy evacuating people as well. And there was a bridge in the neighboring town. It was a train bridge. And next to that train bridge was an automobile bridge. And the train bridge was lower than the automobile bridge. And Dad said it was going to go because of the ice coming down the river. It was going to go. And he came home, get cleaned up. He had been working outrageous hours during this time. And he got a phone call. I'll never forget it. He got a phone call from a colleague, and they said they were going to put a train on the bridge to stabilize it so that it wouldn't go down. And I can remember hearing my father, he was quite passionate. He said, the bridge is going to go, and if the train is on it, the train is going to go as well. He hung up the phone, jumped in his car, went to the neighboring town where the bridge was, and had some really robust discussions with the people that made the decision to put the train on the bridge. He lost that argument. And sure enough, the bridge went and the train went with it. My dad was very authentic. He, wasn't an educated man, but he knew his stuff. He knew what had to be done. He was always in the mind of people's safety because of, his role with the roads. And, he was deemed a hard man, and I think it's because of his candidness and, again, calling a spade a spade.
Beautiful. So growing up in a potato farming community in Canada, what did that teach you about earning an honest dollar?
Yeah, the way it was in our hometown, we went to school 3 weeks earlier than probably the rest of Canada. And that was to take 3 weeks off during the potato harvest. And most of the community would help out the potato farmers by picking potatoes. That was a time when, they didn't have harvesters. It was a digger that would go down, bring the potatoes to the surface, and then the farmers would have a crew of potato pickers. And my mother and my 3 sisters would be picking potatoes during this time. My dad would take 3 weeks off. That was his holiday, and he would work on the farm. My grandfather was working for a potato farmer all his life. And I can remember being that young in the potato field, the old tomato baskets. They would hold about 24 tomatoes. That's what I had. I had as a kid. I would fill that up with potatoes and then empty it in a barrel. And the rule in our family was when you were 10 years old, whatever money you would make picking potatoes, you could keep. But the criteria was you had to pay for your school clothes. So, had a little bit on the side type of thing. But, today, obviously, that would be considered child labor. But I just learned so much. And I know that my family just learned so much during that time about the value of a dollar, that, it's not given to you on a silver platter. You worked for it, you worked hard for it, and you were proud of what you did. And it was a great experience. I wish I would have been able to give that experience to my son.
That is a fair income, honest dollar. So what business principles did you bring across to the corporate world when you jumped into your job at Vital Air in Canada?
Yeah, I guess based on that experience growing up, certainly give 100% of yourself when you have a job, do it. and you'll benefit from that. When I joined Vital Air, I was a respiratory therapist at the time, working at a hospital in Halifax, and Vital Air was across Canada with the exception of the East Coast. And Vital Air had secured a contract to deliver home oxygen. So it was a respiratory home care company. So with this contract, they were looking for a respiratory therapist that was interested in doing some moonlighting and, get a little bit of extra cash. And with the shift work at the hospital, it was pretty easy for me to raise my hand. And I was working mostly night shifts at the hospital at the time, so I could deliver these, small oxygen cylinders across the city and the outlying country areas to people that required home oxygen.
Yep.
And then I was made aware that they were interested in opening up an office in Halifax. So, that was at the time that a respiratory therapist could get a job pretty easily. I've done this quite often in my life with opportunities presented to me that, give it a year and see how you go. So I raised my hand, and I guess one of the biggest questions was, why would you hire me? I don't have any experience in business, and this is, starting up a new office and a new business. And my manager at the time said, just do what you do best. You're a respiratory therapist, you're focused on the patient, what has to be done, just do that. So on my first day, I was handed a set of car keys to a company van, and he said, go out and talk to people and understand what is happening today and what their expectations are for a good, comprehensive respiratory home care package. And that's exactly what I did. Just went out and met with respirologists, palliative care units, respiratory therapy departments, and learned a lot, talked a lot, and listened a lot. So it was a great experience, and started up the business, hired staff, and was very proud of what we accomplished within a relatively short time in Halifax.
As you should be. So you are very much ahead of, or you were very much ahead of your time, Mary. Authenticity and authentic leadership in business today is a really desirable trait. Did you ever sit down when you first got into the business world and decide you wanted to be authentic, or is that just how you rolled every day since you were a little girl?
I was privileged to have an authentic manager when I started. He was a real down-to-earth Newfoundlander, actually. Yeah. And, he taught me so much. He taught me about having candid, open conversations, not only with customers, but with the team, with your staff, with management. So I felt really privileged to be exposed to that in the business world. Obviously, reflecting back on my father and being raised in that type of environment, I feel that level of authenticity, I was exposed to that for so many years. Yeah. So, I built a very close team when I opened that office in Halifax, and we were close in terms of everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody's family. We spent time together, so it was really easy, actually, for me to be authentic. Everybody that I was surrounded by, I felt were authentic.
Yep. So when you suggested to your managing director in the story I told in the introduction that you'd like to share a story about a car crash your mother was in, do you know why he was so discouraging of you sharing that story with your colleagues?
Well, I mean, I can only only assume, because I didn't have that conversation with him after he made the comment. I was part of the leadership team. We had about 400 employees here in Australia that I was, part of the leadership team on. And, he may have been a bit old school. And it was, when I was sharing the story, I got very emotional. I got choked up, tears, etc. And I think he felt that was a sign of vulnerability. And I felt very comfortable and confident in sharing that story, because to me it sent a very relevant message to those 400 employees that everything that we do every day has something to do and impacts somebody's life, whether it's, a mother, a father, sister, brother, child, etc. What we do in the healthcare industry, making sure that product comes in and is available for clinicians to use on patients, that it's a very important thing. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You carry on.
And I felt very comfortable in sharing that, but I truly believe he felt that it was a sign of vulnerability, especially from a leader within the organization. But I must say, after I delivered that story, which was at the company conference, to the audience of 400 employees, the feedback I received after was amazing. And it was feedback that, we've seen a true side of you, Mary, and you weren't afraid of sharing a hard story with the rest of the organization.
It's very good to hear that vulnerability was a good thing. It's odd that it seems like it was a hindrance from your managing director.
Yeah.
When you first got a seat at the table in boardroom discussions in the corporate world, did you feel like you weren't aggressive enough to have your voice heard?
Well, when, I got, moved to a director role, I was inexperienced and I knew it. Initially I took the position of listening, learning, understanding the audience. And, I must admit, I was not very vocal initially. Once I gained a level of confidence that I knew my business and comfortable within, within the leadership team, I didn't hesitate to vocalize. But there's something that I guess I reflect on or I reflected on when I was a respiratory therapist. One day you're a student. And then the next day you're a registered respiratory therapist, right? The letters after your name are not enough. I could walk into the ICU, and just because I was a registered respiratory therapist didn't mean a lot in terms of, the other people, the intensivists and the nurses in the ICU. I had to prove myself. That's just part of life. That is just what happens. And I believe it's the same thing in the business world. When you're sitting around the boardroom table as a new director or a new executive leader in the organization, you do have to prove yourself. I think that's just part of life. And, learning, listening, understanding what's important to the audience. You've got to put that package together. And once I got that package together, I felt comfortable. I did not have a problem, talking and bringing value to the conversation.
And plenty of value you brought by all accounts. So when you started your life out in corporate boardrooms, diversity wasn't as flourishing as it is today in boardroom makeup. Did you ever doubt yourself as a woman in the corporate world and wonder whether you could compete with these ruthless, aggressive, mostly white, powerful men?
I never doubted my abilities and the value that I could bring. And whether we define it as aggression or passion, I'd like to say it's passionate, because I've been involved in many of those passionate discussions, sitting around a boardroom table. But when I first got into a leadership role, I might admit that I was quite naive. Because I guess my experience working in a potato field, starting up an office, I didn't see that male-female differentiation that much, until one particular time. I'll just share a story, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
When I was at Vital Air, we had grown enough that I needed to build a larger office. I didn't, but manage and project manage the building of another office. And two other divisions within the Air Liquide group were going to join the healthcare team in that office. And there were two managers. They were probably in their early 50s. They were male. They had been with the organization for a very long time.
Yeah.
So when I was planning out the office, and I'm laughing about it now because it's how naive I was, planning out the offices and whatnot, nice new office, and consciously, because of their tenure and their time with the organization, I felt it was important for me to plan out bigger offices for them than me. Just thought that was the right thing to do, and working with the space that I had. So I made two decent sized offices for them, and then mine, but mine was in the corner in between their two big offices. And I didn't understand, what the corner office was. And anyway, when I opened up the office and they came in, it was the first time that they had seen it. Oh my goodness, you should have seen their faces. and the talk, around, I had heard from other people within the staff that they were a little upset, and it was simply because of the corner office. And it's like, seriously, I made two big offices for them. And probably being a young female as well, that was the first time that I got a taste of the male-female, young, older references, so to speak.
If you've got the power to make those decisions, put yourself in the corner office.
That's it.
So when you were in boardroom discussions, did you have any strategies to make yourself heard if you were being talked over and people were being too passionate around you?
Yeah, I mean, in a boardroom, when a serious discussion is happening and there's a lot of passion in the room, it is so common to be talked over. I found that you have to be patient. You have to look for a time where, there's a lull in the conversation and you need to have the confidence and the comfort to jump in.
Yeah.
I've raised my hand, if I wasn't being heard or I felt I wasn't being heard. Your body position has, everything to do with it as well. If you're just sitting back and, enjoying the conversation, you've got to, as they say, lean in and be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
And once again, you've got to be confident and comfortable to speak up. You have something to say. You have to feel comfortable, and don't leave until you're heard.
Yeah.
There's many meetings where, they've gone overtime and, it was lengthy meetings, just ensuring that I had a voice. And when I had something to say, I said it. Right. And as well, scaling the room for other individuals that didn't get to say anything and making sure that they did. It's the biggest thing is being patient.
Yep. So when you found yourself in a position in the corporate world where you had the power to hire and fire, did you feel the responsibility to hire more women to get a more equal representation of sexes?
I must admit, I have never consciously hired based on gender. In today's world, most businesses report on diversity. They have diversity ratings, the number of males to females, especially within management. And I think this has done a great thing. It's raised awareness of the inequality of gender within the workforce. And again, I'll reference especially in management or, executive positions. I must admit, in the first 10 years, I was either the sole or minority female within management teams. And I'm slightly, actually not even slightly, probably very concerned about managers hiring based on gender or race.
Right.
I feel that that could potentially result in not hiring the most appropriate person. As I said, I've never consciously hired based on gender. I've hired based on qualifications and the best cultural fit. My son came to me when he was managing one of the gyms within the chain that he manages.
Yep.
And he made a comment to me, and it disturbed me. But when he went for the position, he raised a concern that he was a white female. A white male. Sorry. And I asked him, I said, "Why are you concerned?" He said, "Because I'm the minority from a hiring perspective. I stand less of a chance being a white male." And that's disturbing to me. It really lends itself to not hiring the most appropriate people.
Yeah.
And when you hire an inappropriate person, it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the rest of the employees or the organization.
Very true. Very true. So we've come a long way in the world in terms of diversity and inclusion in workplaces. But are we at the end? Are we good enough, or do we still have a ways to go?
Yeah, I think we have a ways to go. I define diversity and inclusion as experience and collaboration, not necessarily, gender. Managers, I feel, have a tendency to make decisions in isolation and not necessarily embracing the opportunity of tapping into the vast amount of experience that exists within the employees, no matter what department, that are around them, to really get the opinion and to solve the problem from the rest of the team. The inclusion, the ownership, the empowerment really drives in employees. And I just find that managers have a tendency not to reach out. I hope organizations are looking not only at the diversity rating of male to female ratios, but instead embrace the opportunity of the diversity within their team, which is based on the experience.
Yeah, good point. So let me ask you about the young men and women you mentor in business. Do you think young people in business today find any merit in being authentic and vulnerable in business? Or do they struggle with the concept and want results and positions and pay rises right now?
I think, the people that I mentored, they wish for authenticity. And when they see it, they truly appreciate it because they've called it out a number of times. And, some of the mentoring sessions that I've had with them, I understand the pressure that makes people avoid authenticity. What you see is what you get, calling a spade, being candid. Sometimes that's not popular. It's not a popular approach because you're going against what somebody, a decision they've made or whatnot. So it's challenging in that sense. It takes confidence and comfort to be authentic. again, my father was considered a hard man, simply because he called a spade and was authentic. So, I think people want it. They enjoy seeing it, but I think that they struggle with it because it's not always, the most popular avenue to take.
Yeah. Let me ask you one final question, Mary. Today's boardrooms would look a lot different to the ones you started out in business, with their diversity and inclusion and a more equal representation of sexes, races, religion. How proud are you that you played a hand in helping make today's boardrooms more diverse and help lesser voices get a seat at the table in those discussions?
Yeah, look, Barnaby, I'm very proud. I've seen many of the people that I've managed in senior positions today. It puts a smile on my face when I get a call from a past employee to provide a reference for, an advancement role that they're going for. I'm very proud on how times have changed, and I'd like to think that I've played a role in that change over the years that I've been with a number of companies. Those companies themselves look a bit different than they did years ago.
Yeah. And what practical things have you done to help bring more diversity and inclusion to the business world in Australia?
I think mentoring people within an organization. Most organizations have formal mentoring programs now, which I think is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that I felt very passionate about in terms of mentoring individuals is that it's not just assigning a senior leader to be your mentor. There has to be a relationship there. There has to be some type of connection between the two individuals, because you do have to strip bare when you're having mentoring conversations. And, I found myself, they say that part of your role as a manager is coaching. Yes, there's the coaching side of it, but there's the mentoring side, which I find is probably more important, that you're there to share your experiences, and you don't have to be in the same department as somebody you're mentoring, because mentoring is based on situations and, again, experience. And again, puts a smile on my face when I hear about those individuals that I mentored, or my employees taking on additional roles or responsibilities within organizations.
Well, Mary Canning, the highest corporate position I ever got to in the business world was as the hospital claims team coordinator at HBA Health Insurance. So I take my hat off to you in your roles in corporate boardroom discussions, but I have no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds very impressive. But above all of that, above all of your corporate representation and achievements, you're a really nice human being. So thank you so much for joining us on Everyday Greatness.
Thank you, Barnaby. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you all for listening. Thank you to the ARA Group for being our major sponsor for the 5th year in a row. Thank you to Look Studio Australia for recording this podcast. And I hope that when you all put your devices down in a little while, you lift your head up, push your shoulders back, and walk down the street proud of being an everyday Joe or Joanne bag of donuts. I hope you can join us next week, where my co-host, Order of Australia medalist Scott Gibbons, and I will be talking to the CEO of the Antarctic Science Foundation, former elite cyclist and reborn skateboard enthusiast Andrew J. Kelly. We'll talk about how being a modern corporate leader is a trick of balancing being a good human being with the demands of business success and the huge importance of the small goodness in life. I hope you can join us for that one. But in the meantime, if you'd like to find out more about this show, go to our website, everydaygreatness.com.au, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or LinkedIn. Thank you again for listening today.